So, welcome to the first community call in March 2020. We've got a good packed agenda for you today. Let me explain the agenda of what we've got here. Let me share my screen here a moment. So the agenda we have today, we have quite a few demos we're going to go through, but always have time for questions. So Phil is going to go through an exciting VS Code extension that is in preview, and he'll show you how we can do some debugging of that. And that sort of carries on. If you missed last community call, Phil showed VS Code dev extensions, the dev containers, which is something I suggest you also go and check out. Then we'll dive into more about Dapper logs and metrics with some visualization and different tools, which is builds upon the work that we showed in the last community call of just saying how Dapper shows out metrics itself. And then Yaron will talk about how we've introduced a new secrets building block API and an extremely easy way of being able to get our secrets out of different secure secret stores. Then I'll do a little update on where we are with the release, and then we'll have open time for questions. We'll have at least try to get for at least 20 minutes for questions at the end. So feel free to ask whatever you want to do there. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand over to Phil.
All right, my name is Phil Hoff. I'm a developer on the Azure Tools team in Visual Studio, and our team owns a lot of the container-related and cloud compute-related extensions for both Visual Studio, as well as Visual Studio for Mac and Visual Studio Code. What I want to show you today is just a quick run-through of the initial version of the Dapper extension for Visual Studio Code, which is just released this morning. So you'll see my screen. The Dapper extension 0.1.0 is now in the marketplace. You can go pull it down and start playing with it. Let us know what you think, what you find, any questions, and so on. So let's go ahead and just take a quick demo. So one of the things that the main purpose of the extension is to make it very simple to get started with Dapper and development, in particular debugging with your particular app, whether it's a Node app, whether it's a .NET Core app, and so on. And the intention is just that it sort of takes care of some of those more tedious details of working within the Dapper environment, getting Dapper runtime started and making calls through Dapper to your app. So let's get started by creating a new app. So we'll go create a new .NET Core app. .NET new web API. Turn off SSL, and we'll say, we'll go create a brand new from scratch app. We'll open up VS Code to that new folder, and we'll wait a moment for the OmniSharp extension to prompt us to add some of the debugging assets. So we'll go ahead and do that. So now we've got an app. We can debug it if we want, but what we really want to do is debug the app within the context of Dapper. So how do we do that? So let's start by opening our launch.json. So you can see that the OmniSharp extension gave us a debug configuration for just launching the app in the debugger. What we'd really like to do is when we launch the app in the debugger, we also want to start the Dapper runtime so that we get our Dapper sidecar so that we can start making calls through that sidecar into our application. So we can do that with the Dapper extension, which adds a number of new commands. The first of which is scaffold Dapper tasks. So we'll go ahead and select that. And it's going to ask us which debug configuration do we want to derive our new Dapper debug configuration from. We'll say .NET Core launch. It asks us what name do we want, what Dapper application ID do we want. App is fine. What port is the application running on, which Dapper needs to know about. Say 5000. Okay. So now we've got a new .NET Core launch web with Dapper launch configuration. And it's basically a copy of the first one, but with some of the Dapper stuff tacked onto it. So we can see its new pre-launch task is this new Dapper debug task, and its post-debug task when we're done debugging is this new Dapper down task. So we can go to the tasks.json, and what we'll see here is there's a couple of new tasks. There's the Dapper debug task. Here's where our app ID and app port gets set, and it depends on build, so it inserted itself into the build process. on our behalf. And then there's a task to take the Dapper environment back down when we're done debugging. So now that we've done that, we can just go ahead and select our new debug configuration, .NET Core Launch Web with Dapper. We'll select that. We'll start debugging. And we'll let the application build. The application will come up in the debugger, and then we'll see what happens next. All right, so we're now debugging. It's a web API, so of course there's really no home page to browse to, even though it brought it up. We'll go to the terminal window. You can see here's our Dapper runtime output. So Dapper started, notice the app was running, it's now initialized. And now we can interact with our application through the Dapper environment. Now, one approach would be, so we could fire up Postman and we could start making calls using a particular URL syntax for making calls through the Dapper sidecar that then goes through to our application. But I always forget what that syntax looks like. And so I kind of want an easier way. Well, with the Dapper extension, you'll see that there's a new Dapper tab. So go select the tab, and we can see this tab in its initial state basically shows us the running Dapper applications on our system. You can say there's our app called app. And if we want to interact with it, we can simply right click and say, I want to invoke a method on that app through Dapper. We can say invoke get. It asks us what's the method name that we want to invoke. The standard scaffolded .NET Core Web API is just forecast. And you can see it made the call. And you can see here's the response that we got it. It's not super exciting because I forgot that it's more interesting when you actually interact with the debugger. So I'll actually set a breakpoint, and we can verify when we go to the Dapper tab. We'll right click, we'll say invoke get. And now you can see that we remember the last thing that you added or the last thing that you entered. So just makes things a little bit quicker for repeated invocations. You can see now we hit our breakpoint that was called through the Dapper application or through the Dapper sidecar, then relay to our application, and then we can debug from there and continue on. And you can see when we stop debugging, our Dapper application is no longer running, so the Dapper runtime has been torn down again. So that's .NET Core. But what about other platforms? So let's go ahead and open up our other app, and let's create a new Express.js app. Do an npm install. After we generated our scaffolded our Express app, we'll reopen that folder in VS Code. Here we've got our basic Express app. We'll go to the debug tab. There's no extension that automatically scaffolds a debug task for Node apps yet. So we'll go and just create one. Say create a new Node.js. Debug configuration. Now we've got a launch.json that has one debug configuration, but we don't just want to debug our Node app. We want to debug our Node app within Dapper. So we'll do the same thing. We'll go to our Dapper scaffold Dapper tasks command. This time we'll say use the launch program configuration. You can name it app, that's fine. And this says, hey, what port do you want? It knows that it's a Node app. So it suggested 3000, which is great because that's what Express uses by default. So now I've got a new debug configuration, this time with Dapper. And very similarly, as we saw in .NET, it created a new tasks.json that has the Dapper up and the Dapper down tasks to take the Dapper environment up and down as we debug. So let's go ahead and we'll go set a breakpoint in our controller. We'll go run our new launch program with Dapper task. And we'll start debugging. We can see we're now attached to the debugger. Dapper is running. We'll go to our Dapper task. Here's our Dapper app that's running. We can do a similar thing, invoke. In this case, it's users is the method name. And there we go. We now hit a breakpoint in our Node app through the Dapper sidecar that's been relayed to our application. And then we can debug our Node app just like we could with VS Code and keep going. So that's invoking methods. So there's a couple other things that we could do. let's say we wanted to not just get, but we wanted to do a post instead, which is another option. Let's go ahead and in Node, we'll go ahead and do a post. We'll just add our new post handler in here. And now we can debug again. Now Dapper's been restarted. We'll go back to our Dapper tab. There's our app. We'll say now we want to invoke, but we want to invoke a post method. Say the method name is still the same, users, but we can now enter a payload since it's a post. Let's enter a random payload. Now we've hit our breakpoint in our post method. We can see our request body. Here's our payload. And we can debug just like we normally would with any other Node app, but within the context of Dapper. Okay, so there's one more thing that we could show, and that is how do we send an event or publish an event through Dapper and then receive that event in our application. So let's go ahead and set up some of the infrastructure that's necessary to tell Dapper that we're interested in receiving events. So I'll go copy some code. It's in our app.js. We'll add two handlers. One is to a get method for /Dapper/subscribe. This is what the Dapper runtime will call when your application starts so that it knows what topics you're interested in. In this case, we're just interested in this topic A. And then there's a separate handler that's just /topic A. This is the endpoint that's called by Dapper when Dapper receives an event through whichever event binding mechanism that you happen to be using. Let's go ahead and set a breakpoint here. We'll start debugging again. See, the Dapper environment's restarted. We'll go here. We see our app running. Now I'll go publish message to application. In this case, it asks us what topic do we want to publish. We'll say topic A. And again, what payload do we want to send it? Just enter the payload. And now we've published an application through Dapper. So that's been caught by the Dapper sidecar, translated into this HTTP call to our Node application. Now we've hit our breakpoint in our event handler, and we should see our body somewhere. There's our body is our sort of cloud events wrapped body or payload that we entered. But under data, you'll see there's the data, the payload that we entered. So we can interact with that, debug it, do whatever we need to do, and then let it go. And so that's publishing events through Dapper, through VS Code. All right. So that's just a quick tour through the initial version of the Dapper extension for Visual Studio Code. Like I said, it's available in the marketplace. Download it, install it, check it out, see how it works. Let us know what features you need. Let us know what issues you run into. Let us know anything at all really about the extension. So that's all for me.
That's fantastic, Phil. What's the best way people can post feedback? Where should they post it? On the Dapper GitHub channel, a GitHub channel, I should say, or do you have somewhere else?
So for issues that you run into, like I said, I just switched back to the Dapper tab. We've got the sort of help and feedback section. So you can really easily say review issues. That will bring up a link that takes you to our repos issues page. Then of course you can add new issues, review the issues, add comments, add feedback, whether they're bugs or just suggestions or feature requests or anything else. By all means, add whatever you need, whatever feedback you want. There's also a specific report issue where you can enter some details. This is somewhat of a nicer way to add if you run into specific issues with the extension. This will attach a little bit more detail to that issue.
Phil, that was awesome. Just to point out on this tab here, this is Mike. I'm the PM that works with Phil. This would be for Dapper tooling issues. But if you have Dapper runtime issues, Mark and his team have their own channel. But if you have issues with our tools or suggestions, and this is an early preview, so please do give us those suggestions. This is a great way that Phil's made it easy to add those issues.
All right.
Right, that's fantastic. Anyone have any questions before we move on? Feel free to kind of post them in the chat window or just open up your mic. If not, that was fantastic, Phil. For one, I'm super excited that we can give this to people now, because having debugging capabilities inside Dapr, inside VS Code, is going to be a game changer for helping people build and develop their apps. So thank you for doing the hard work.
Hey, Phil, this is Lynn. I got a couple questions for you.
Sure.
This is awesome, by the way. Nice work. It's really cool. Having been doing this the manual way and configuring task.json and launch.json manually, it's nice to have this extension now. A couple questions. So one, I'm assuming that I can run multiple Dapper apps all at once. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So it's going to depend a little bit in terms of like how complex it's going to be. It's going to depend on whether you're talking about like a mono repo versus like separate repos.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a mono repo, then it's just a matter of sort of copying the tasks and making sure that the names don't collide. And you sort of have separate chains of these Dapper build and run commands that sort of work for your individual services in that repo. But yes, by all means they should, and you may need to make some tweaks in terms of specifically setting like the Dapper port for each of those applications, because by default we don't set it in the scaffolding, and by default it's 3500. So if you're going to run more than one, then you're going to want them to have their own port. But aside from just some additional configuration that you might need to do to sort of set that up, yes, it should support that.
But Phil, regarding
Go ahead, Mike.
Regarding the Dapper port, that'd be just as easy to go into the task.json or the launch.json and set that in the JSON configuration.
Right. We should be able to just go in here and say.
You get IntelliSense, right?
Yes, we do get IntelliSense.
That was my next question. This is great. So you can set all of the Dapr D parameters from here, which is awesome.
Right. Yeah. So there's the HTTP port is by default 3500. You know, we can make it 3501 for application 1, 3502 for application 2, and so on and so forth.
Nice.
But yes, all of the Dapr D flags and configuration arguments should be exposed, and you get reasonable IntelliSense for what they are, what they do.
Cool. And then as far as the method invocation goes, like you did a get, for example, but it didn't have any extra route parameters or query string. Is that supported today, or is that something you guys are planning on adding? Or
yeah, so if we are running, it's still running. So let's go ahead and do a get. Right. So if I needed to do, get users 123/deposit or whatever, right? It might be. Yeah, that absolutely works.
Just so passes on through. Perfect.
Yeah. So this passes on through. Basically, it's generally the equivalent of calling Dapper, Dapper invoke, Dapper invoke post, and so on. So it's intended to be very similar feeling to that. And obviously, if there's other things like this, isn't necessarily the nicest way of entering this kind of information, in particular, the payload. So if you have suggestions or desires about how you might want to enter that kind of information, let us know, and maybe we can find a better way of doing that.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to pick your brain a bit. We've been using for our local stuff. We've been using what is it called? REST client. I don't know if you've seen that or not, but it basically allows you to save off like a .rest file, if you will. Yeah. Which is nice because then I can check that into source control, right? And then I can easily reproduce and just execute a get or a post or whatever. And anybody who checks out my code, if they want to test it, they can do the same. So I'd love to ideate with you a little bit about, if that's something that I feel like we're halfway there. It would be really cool if there's any possible way to save off some of those requests or something like that, to where, because it can become tedious to have to enter the payload every single time, especially if there's lots of post information or whatever that you're sending. So yeah, and
like I said, we do keep track of the last thing that you entered. So for payload and for method name and so on for each of the get, post, and publish commands. So that helps a little bit. But absolutely, I agree that once you start getting a little bit more complex than that in terms of what your payload looks like and sort of how it combines with different testing scenarios and different methods, then yeah, it'd be nice to have a different kind of mechanism for tying those together, configuring those, and then just selecting which one you want.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
absolutely, I'm interested in knowing what
Yeah.
what you're trying to do, how you sort of envision, that kind of configuration and information being stored, and what else you might be using it for, and so on. So yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
that's great feedback.
Cool,
Okay,
man.
great.
Well, nice work.
Hey, nice work. Yeah, it's good stuff. Thank you very much. Thank you. I posted the link to the extension in the chat window if you want to go download it now. Other than that, let's move on and move on to Young Boo now. And Young Boo, you're up next to show us what we've done with Grafana and Kibana in terms of log visualization, metrics, and logs.
Hello, this is Young Boo. I'm going to share my screen now. So, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
So, in the last community call, we showed how to enable the Prometheus metrics in Dapper. So, since then, we have worked hard to enable the structured logging and monitoring tools. So today I'm going to show what we are working on Kibana and Grafana and Azure Monitor to provide a log search experience and shows the dashboard experience to Dapper users. So for the structural logging, we enable the JSON formatted logs from in the Dapper system core processes. So with that, actually, if you want to see some like logs from the injector, you can go to the Kibana and then you can search the logs. For example, injector. You can see all the logs emitted by the Dapper injector, and then you can see what's which app this injector is injected sidecar to. So and then see the status of the sidecar injection here. So if you want to see like runtime, then you can search by this. You can just filter by scope field, and you can see all the sidecar runtime logs on Kibana. And also, if you want to see like specific apps sidecar logs, then you can search like this. I deployed the Hello World Kubernetes app to my cluster, so you can see the sidecar logs, which is related to the Node app here. So this is we are working in progress now for the logging. We are adding more logs on that, and also we will provide a Dapper dashboard templates in 0.50 release, so you can import the dashboard onto your Kibana and then tweak that dashboard easily. So, and then if you want to see the metrics, actually in the previous community call, we showed how to enable the Prometheus metrics on Dapper. So this time we would like to show the Grafana dashboard here. This is just an example of dashboard for Dapper. So I mean, we prepared this dashboard for this demo. So right now we are emitting the only two metrics in the HTTP server-side metrics and gRPC server-side metrics. This chart shows the HTTP API endpoint, latency when the user app calls the sidecar. So you can see some metrics here. And also this chart shows gRPC latency between the sidecar. So this is just an example. We will add more metrics, and we will provide a dashboard templates. So you can easily import the dashboard templates into your Grafana and then tweak based on your proposal. This is for, I mean, Kibana and Grafana are for the non-Azure user. for an Azure user, you don't need to install the Kibana and then the Grafana and Fluentd Elasticsearch to enable the logging and then metrics. You can just use the Azure Monitor with AKS. So let me show some example here. Sorry. So if you are the Azure user, then if you enable the Azure Monitor in AKS, then you can the Azure Monitor OMS agent is gathering all the container logs and then the metrics, and then emitting it to the Azure Monitor. So you can search the metrics and logs in Azure Monitor. So like this. So I would like to show how to query the logs in Azure Monitor here. So basically, as I said before, for structural logging, we emitted the JSON formatted logs. So you can, by using the parse JSON keywords in Azure Monitor, so you can just parse the JSON log, and then you can project several fields, and you can easily query the logs, structured logs, and then you can query, if you want to see the only Dapper runtime sidecar logs, you can start with Dapper runtime. You can see all the logs from of Dapper sidecar like this. And also, we will provide a dashboard. So basically, this is just an example for Dapper dashboard. It's not that we are not finalizing a dashboard. So for example, this dashboard is built using the metrics and the logs, Dapper system component, system processes emitted. So basically, this first chart shows the when the Dapper system processes started, you can easily figure out if the system process is crashed or like restart. And then this chart shows shows the HTTP API latency and then the gRPC latency between the sidecar that you saw in the Grafana before. And this one shows the logs for each system process. And this is just an example. We are adding more useful the chart here to let Dapper operator easily diagnose the Dapper issues and monitor the Dapper. That's all I have now. Any questions? Yeah, and then if you are interested in the Dapper observability improvement project, and you can go to the Dapper organization and then you can see the progress of the Dapper observability.
No, this is fantastic. I mean, the whole idea now is to be able to give you deep insights using the tools of your choice, whether that's Grafana and Kibana inside a Kubernetes cluster standalone on-premise, or inside Azure through Azure Monitor, so you can actually see what's happening inside the Dapper runtime itself on each one of the system services like the operator and the sidecar injector and things like this. So hopefully now we'll give you insights. And of course, your own pipeline can push out logs, events or traces, I should say, for your own application. But that's outside of the own Dapper runtime itself. But yeah, this is pretty cool stuff, and hopefully it'll give you now deep insights and be able to find out any issues, and particularly with figuring out things like latency between calls and other runtime metrics. All right, great. Any questions before we move on? You can always ask questions about these at the end if they come to your mind. That's fantastic, Young Boo. Like it a lot. And as we said, the dashboard is not fixed, so give us feedback on what you'd like to see on some of those things and add it into the issues list inside the observability. Tag it as an observability type inside the Dapper runtime repo. Great, let's move on now. Thanks, Young Boo. Let's move on to our final demo before we get to question time. And Yaron, you're up next.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'll share my screen. All right, please confirm when you can see the terminal.
Yes, we can see your terminal.
All right, great. So today we're gonna take a look at something that's coming out in Dapr 0.5, which is a secrets API. So we've talked to a lot of developers and DevOps people, and people have been telling us, hey, you know, I want my application to be able to get secrets without necessarily tying into the specific SDKs and issues that I would basically need to go through for connecting to Azure Key Vault or AWS Secrets Manager or GCP Secrets Manager or HashiCorp Vault or even a Kubernetes secret. And so we've seen a lot of these solutions basically mounting init containers that fetch secrets and write them to the local pod file system, or just sidecars that do that. And mount it to the file system. And people have been writing these custom solutions for themselves. And we thought, hey, well, wouldn't it be great if Dapr would give you this API where you can just fetch secrets, and you can use secrets not only for Dapr components, but for your application level secrets too. So we took that feedback and we actually wanted to do that, us, the maintainers for Dapr. And then we received an amazing external contribution from Carlos Mendable. Thank you, Carlos. I don't know if you're on the call, which enabled that. Yes, and this is what we're gonna see today. So I'm actually gonna be talking about something else that Dapr brings along to developers everywhere. And if we go to Visual Studio Code here, I have a Rust application that I wrote. And yes, this is Rust. So you can imagine it took me 28 hours just to get this to compile. But after I was able to get it to compile, I realized something quite nice. Rust doesn't have an official Azure SDK. It doesn't even have an official AWS SDK or Google Cloud SDK. So Rust developers are feeling a bit left out of all the cloud native stuff. So for example, if I'm a Rust developer and I want to fetch secrets from Azure Key Vault, I don't have an easy way or even a way of doing that. But with Dapr, because Dapr is providing all these cloud native capabilities via HTTP and gRPC, I can consume that no matter the language that I use. So this is Rust. And when the function comes up, the main function here, I'm basically calling Dapr just like you'd call any Dapr endpoint into a new secrets API endpoint. And I'm basically specifying, hey, I want to fetch secrets from Key Vault, and this is the key for my secret. So in this case, I'm using Azure Key Vault, which is in Dapr defined like this. I have a component here with the type of secret store as Azure Key Vault, and then an SPN client ID. And the secrets aren't kept in here because Dapr knows to take advantage of AKS pod identity. So the authentication to Azure Key Vault happens with Azure Managed Identities. Yes, and this component can be swapped out for any secret store that Dapr supports. We're going to be coming out with 2 new ones for 0.5, which are AWS and Google Cloud. And then the only thing that's remaining to do is basically to just deploy this application here. So I have the Rust app, nothing special, just the AAD pod binding for managed identities. I have the container here and really nothing special here. So I'm just going to apply this thing. Oh, and here you can see we're supposed to print the secret if it works. So if the demo gods are with us today, and they have been with me about an hour ago, so I expect they still lingered on. We have the application running here, and we can look at the container. And yes, so this is a secret. Dapr 0.5 is coming soon. And if I go over to my Azure Key Vault, I can go to secrets here, and I can see that I have a my secret with a version, and I can show the secret value, which is what we've just saw. So this is basically it. Thank you, Mark. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Yeah, that's a fantastic use case, actually, of showing how if you don't have an SDK, you just call an API. And hopefully, let's open it up for some questions on these things, but hopefully people are going to find it super useful now because particularly when it takes the managed identity from the POB in order to authenticate into Azure. So you don't even have to think about that. So Dapper does that on your behalf, which I think is a incredible piece of functionality to take away from you. So there's a question here. This is great. Are there any plans to be able to create secrets through the API?
Yeah, this is a good question. So we might do that. If there's enough demand for it. So the first thing I'm going to say, which I say for every question, go create an issue. Let's tackle that. Let's see the traction, and if there's enough demand, we can do it. The only thing that I'm a little bit concerned about is matters of security, right? I mean, getting secrets is one thing, writing them is a different one. Yeah, so we might be able to put that in. I'm just thinking out loud here. We might want to authenticate access to those APIs to be able to guarantee that Dapr doesn't actually become something that endangers your application rather than helps them. But yeah, there could certainly be plans to do that.
Yeah, security is top of mind across all of Dapr. We showed we shipped the MTLS work in the last one, and now we're thinking deeper about security in other places as well, particularly between the app and Dapr itself.
Correct. API authentication, sorry.
Yes, authorization. Yes.
Yeah. So if we have a good API authentication in place, I could see something like creating secrets through the API becoming something we could do. Yes. Good to see the feedback. Thanks, everyone.
Yes. Okay. Any more questions on that? If not, I mean, thank you. That was actually awesome in terms of Carlos as well, your contribution to it. It was fantastic to see that. And then, we've wrapped it all up now, and you'll see it in the next release. So talking about that, then let me just share my screen here a moment. Just talk to you about where we are in terms of releases. Hopefully you can see my screen. Can you see my screen? So where we are right now is we're actually in the middle of doing a 0.5 milestone plan. You can go and find the milestone plan here. In fact, if you look at the milestone plan here, here's all the issues here. We're sort of closing things out inside.
Mark, we can't see your screen. At least I can.
Oh, hang on. Let me. Okay, right. Now can you see my screen? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so here you should be able to see. This is our 0.5 milestone plan. You can go and see the milestone plan itself in GitHub here. Here's all the issues that we're tracking at the moment, going through progress in terms of done. So feel free to kind of look through these, comment on any of them, tag any issues that you would like to see inside of this milestone. We're planning though on having a release. The main things that we were focusing on is what you saw today: the observability from Dapper, the secrets building block that Yaron just demonstrated. We're working on simplifying some of the .NET API inside the SDK so that you have a single client type API. And there was a little bit of work around strongly typed Java actors, which we released in the Java SDK in the 0.4 release. So those were kind of the main themes amongst fixing up a few bugs that we had around things and other smaller issues. And we're aiming now on doing a code freeze next week. And you'll see a release targeted now for next week. So effectively, a week on Thursday of next week, we'll have the 0.5 release. That's the goal at the moment. We're on track for that. And we'll usually cut back on features in order to get that release out. And then everything that we showed you today in terms of demos, and we'll have in that release. We're pretty excited that we can get it into your hands. After that, what we intend to do is trying to have regular releases about every 3 weeks after that date. So you'll then see one at the beginning of April, one towards the end of April, then one in May, and so that's the cycle we're going to try and stick to. So plenty of opportunity to kind of, take PRs from you if there are things you want to push to us. Plenty of opportunity for you to comment and raise issues. Plenty of opportunity for you to be able to look at what's happening inside the milestone. We want to be very fluid here. We really sort of get to finishing this milestone and then think of what we're going to do in terms of the key scenarios enabling next. And mostly we want to be driven by things that you're looking for, plus a strong focus on the drive towards a V1 stable release, where we want to make sure things like security and observability and broad test cases. You'll see a lot more end-to-end test case work happen inside the April milestone, and I'm sure we'll do some demos of that as we get nearer the time. Okay, great. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing at this point in time, and we're going to open it up for questions. Feel free to ask any question of your choice. Ask about what's happening, more questions that I just talked about in the milestone, anything about the demos we showed today, any particular issue, whether you want to talk about something up on the roadmap. You know, any question is valid, and we'll do the best to answer it all. And if you don't get to it today, you know, feel free to post things on our GitHub channel. So, questions. And by the way, you don't just have to post them in the chat window. If you want to open up your mic and ask questions that way, that may be an easier thing to do sometimes. It looks like we've delivered everything you've asked for then.
Okay, well, as long as nobody else is going.
Dave. Thank you, Dave.
Well, I don't know. It seems like every meeting, nobody seems to have much interest anymore. The thing that I brought up in eventual roadmap, is there at least a light at the end of the tunnel for the dynamic subscriptions?
On dynamic subscriptions on PubSub?
Yeah.
Good question. We is that something that you're looking for in your
something that I'm looking for, something that someone else who's got a very big use case scenario, we're talking definitely hyperscale needs. I mean, it's ultimately the underlying plumbing you need for actor events.
Yes.
Whether you guys decide to do it or not, but it would allow it at least to be done yourself if that were the case.
Yeah, so I think there's two questions here. One is dynamic subscriptions, so that on the fly I can subscribe to a new topic without having them fixed. And then
right,
secondly,
there's been issues open forever, right?
Yes, and then secondly, hooking that up into actors so that you can actually subscribe to them in actors fairly easily through an API. Yeah, no, we hadn't put that on our roadmap very much because we hadn't really, I mean, the issue has been there, but we were trying to be driven by customer asks. So if you're saying, I'm asking for this in another use case, and you know, I'm going to use this inside a production environment, then yes, we can put that on the list.
Yeah, I definitely have two completely different use cases for that are, you know, fairly large in both. And I just can't imagine the ask being very low, because anytime you have to communicate outside of the cluster, you need bidirectional communications, and the instance is important. In that case, that happens to be serving that request.
Yes, no, we agree with you. We agree with you entirely, and I think now you've raised the issue with us. In fact, interestingly, we were talking about this very topic earlier yesterday, or earlier in the week. So I think it's something that we should look into, and it would be great if you could go into. Let me dig out the issue, unless you actually know where the issue is. It'd be good if you could go into the issue and put a comment in there in terms of, you know, where, you know, that fact that you're interested in having this done, and you know, your use case. That would help us a lot.
Okay, I'm pretty sure it is there already.
Right, okay. And then,
God, who on the team? Actually, the issue was opened by somebody on your team.
yeah, I'll find it. I'll find a few and things like that. And I'll send
I added a lot to it. Then we had sort of an hour meeting offline about how it could be used to plumb actor events and
yes,
diagram the whole thing out.
I think actually a man has just put it into the chat window. Okay, so here's what we'll do. So yes, we hear you. Let us, if you want to, let us put an idea of a proposal together, and you know, we'll mull over it and start to put some more comments into the issue and start talking about it all, and see, you know, what the cost of the work looks like. And you know, feel free to kind of add your comments to it as we mull over that issue, and see what it takes to get into a future release. But we hear you. Good feedback. We hear you, and we hear that it's important both for, you know, cross-cluster, cross-environment subscriptions, publishing messages as well as for actively. So yes, thank you for raising the issue.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, all right, and we'll give you an update before. Let's say we'll give you an update. We'll have some update before the next community call. So the next community call is on this 2 weeks' time. So it's 17th, and so we'll have an update before then and have a decision on it. Okay.
Great. By the way, I hear someone else saying hello, so I'll get out of your way.
Yeah, sorry,
Okay.
I don't know if this is the right place to ask this question, but I do come into some issues whereby my pods that are running, they get evicted, and I'm not sure. I don't know the best ways actually how to fix that issue.
So what's your specific question? Your pods being evicted?
Yes.
What does that mean?
The pods running on the Kubernetes clusters, it gets evicted.
We're having a hard time hearing you.
Fix it through the YAML configuration for it.
Mark,
yeah.
Mark, I'll take this.
Okay.
So Aziz, pods getting evicted, there might be multiple reasons for them getting evicted. If you're asking about how to check if it's Dapr related for the eviction, can you open an issue or reach out to me on Gitter and I can help you debug this thing?
Sure, thank you.
So my handle is Yaron2 on Gitter. Please reach out or open an issue, and we'll just ask you for some logs and I guess CPU and memory traces, and we can guide you to see why Kubernetes evicts those pods. And even if it's not Dapr related, we'll be glad to help.
Yeah, I just posted the Gitter community channel inside there if you don't know where it is, but that's the best place to jump on those questions. We're pretty active outside there. So yeah, as Yaron stated. Okay. Other questions people want to ask?
There's a question in the chat window by Aaron.
Okay, it says, have you seen any particular interesting use cases for Dapper recently that you can talk about? Is it being used in ways we might not have anticipated? Well, actually, I mean, so far we've seen quite a bit of interest with it because people are enabling them to do cross-cloud deployments in the sense of that it makes their cloud agnostic. That's one side of it all. We see a lot of people just because it's very well integrated with Kubernetes in terms of it eases its deployment inside of Kubernetes environments, and it allows you just to take advantage of because Dapr is good with Kubernetes, we can launch the Dapr sidecar inside that, and so a lot of the deployments are sort of Kubernetes related. There's a fair amount of diversity. I mean, we've had everything from an IoT solution at the moment. We're talking with sort of people, actually a couple of IoT type solutions where the diagnostics coming from devices gets pushed out through some ingestion mechanism like IoT Hub inside Azure, or any device registration service that the cloud provider has. And then actors are being sort of fairly popular in that regard in terms of device representation as a virtual device thing. We can't really talk too much about them all because these are sort of under NDA, these ones. So I mean, what happens in time as customers get closer to production, they often allow us to write an article and then we can publish it at that point. But we're getting a lot of interest. Let's just say we're getting a lot of interest from financial, manufacturing, IoT. We haven't had anything in the gaming scenario just yet, but building back-end services, particularly on sort of Kubernetes type environments. So yes, it's fairly diverse. What's the story for Azure serverless scenarios, i.e. like Azure functions? Oh, right, good question. We have a story that's formulating there. And what we'd like to try to do is talk about that. Most likely we'll talk about that in April. We're just kind of closing on where it looks like in terms of March. But yes, we have a great question. We actually have a story that's formulating there where we want to make sure that Dapper and functions work very well together. So I mean, you can do it today. If you go and look inside our samples, we have an example there of a functions runtime that gets deployed inside a Kubernetes cluster, and then the functions runtime calls onto the Dapper pub sub API to do pub sub between functions. We're working with the functions guys very, very closely to make that a better integrated experience with functions. So think in the same way, if you go and look inside the .NET SDK now, we've done a great piece of work with the .NET Core team for ASP.NET layered on top of Dapr, integrated, where you can do a pub sub message. So think of a similar approach inside the functions world that we're doing. And I'm pretty sure we'll probably be able to do a demo of that sometime in the next community call. Not the next community call, but probably a community call inside April. So yes, we're avidly working on that. In fact, it's our goal across a lot of the frameworks: Blazor, server-side Blazor, ASP.NET, server-side functions. If there's some framework that you like to see, like Django, we're very keen to integrate Dapr into those to make those particular frameworks have a first-class experience. Thanks for sharing. Particularly interested in use cases outside of Kubernetes. I have a couple myself. Yeah, I mean, at this point in time, Dapr will slowly get integrated into other hosting platforms. At the moment, it's just self-hosted, and you can run that inside VMs, and or a machine environment. But if you want a distributed environment, Kubernetes is one. But yes, I mean, we'll eventually go for other ones. It's just a matter of getting there over time. I can give you an example of an edge case. I can give you an example of an edge case if you want. Yeah, actually, that's another interesting one as well. We see a number of people post online about getting Dapr running on Raspberry Pis, just as the ARM deployment. And we actually have, an effort that's spinning up to get, with one customer, to get Dapr deployed onto IoT edge runtime and see what that looks like. But ARM deployment on edge devices is another place. More like a normal use case. Okay, so those are some ideas, and maybe certainly as we get towards sort of middle of the year, when a lot of our customers have got things into production and they're happy to kind of talk about it more, we'll post more stories at that point. Any more questions? Okay, if there's no more questions, thank you for joining us on this call. The next call will be in 2 weeks' time, which will be on the 17th of March. At that point in time, we'll give you an update of where we are, possibly about what we're looking for a release after that, but we'll certainly have released the 0.5 runtime. And as always, find us on the GitHub channel, post issues inside the GitHub, tell your friends and family about Dapr, and we look forward to reaching out to you and hearing what you want to do with Dapr, and particularly if you want to work with us and you have particular use case scenarios and you're taking Dapr into production. We want to hear from you, because we're willing to work very closely with customers to help you, be successful. So thank you very much. And the recording will be posted later today on the Dapr recordings.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.